It's an incredible linkage to your very early comment when we started the panel, where you said we need to be courageous to go back to the question of how did we get here? And that is going to be very important as I'm listening in to how we frame and articulate the African position at COP27. Allow me then to make my way back to President Mnangagwa once again. Mr. President, what is becoming apparent in light of the Sustainable Development Goals is that many African countries are not going to meet the targets by 2030. The question to you, sir, is, looking ahead, where do you see opportunities for greater collaboration amongst African leaders to ensure that we get back on track as much as possible?
Well, thank you again for that question. As my brother has said, COP26 ended up with the third world countries, Africa and some countries in Asia, so Latin America, on one side, and the first world on the other. And I may have misunderstood, but I felt that the first world was looking at us jumping, leapfrogging to embrace green energy, clean energy. And yet, they themselves, when they developed, there's a history of how they developed to where they are. And in that process, they used the thermal power. And now we are at a stage where most of our African countries have coal, and they use thermal power, and they were told this is dangerous. We, as my brother said, they made commitments. If indeed they honor the commitments, well and good, we'll then use their finance to generate green energy. But in the absence of that, I, for one, would not abandon using thermal power in order to modernize and industrialize Zimbabwe. I'm fully aware that as a result of the problems in Europe, some of the countries who are speaking at COP16 are going back to thermal power currently. So this is the example of double standards. It is critically important that we both understand it is necessary that, of course, we move on. But we must be allowed, be given transition, a reasonable transition to move away from thermal power to green energy. So it is my view that Africa, and in fact, I think that what is happening currently makes us in Africa to wake up. We have all the resources needed to develop our countries, from food security, fertilizer security. We have all the inputs. I'm happy that Tanzania has just said that they are building their fertilizer factory. And may I also announce that on Monday, 2 days ago, I commissioned mine in Zimbabwe for the production of fertilizer. So Africa has the resources to be self-sufficient, to modernize our countries, to industrialize our countries, to mechanize our countries. All what is needed is cooperation, integration, and the sharing of experiences and our resources. If we did that, we will succeed. But I believe that when we go to COP27 in Egypt, end of this year, I have not done that the African voice will be one, that we must be allowed to be given sufficient transition period so that we move. But if they want us to leapfrog to their level, they must pay the cost.
Thank you very much, President Mnangagwa. And of course, you highlight the big conversation of what is the just transition and what should it look like, but also you're taking us back to the point raised again by His Excellency Desalegn, where he said collective will, collective voice, and that's what actually leads to collective action. So I want to stay within the agenda and the common African position ahead of COP27 as I come to you, President Bazoum, once again. As I come to you, sir, in your opinion, what else do you think is important in the context of a common position amongst African states as we go into COP27? What should we be putting on the table collectively, in your view? Thank you very much, President Bazoum, and bringing the issues together quite strategically, speaking on the one hand about what is reasonable is the question that you've raised for us. What is reasonable in terms of the expectation from African countries, but also bringing in now the importance of climate change, and that even as we try to work through and address conflict, we need to understand the root cause of where it comes from, and some of that is rooted in climate change. So thank you for bringing to the surface that complexity. Now, the final question to you, Vice President. As we wrap up, I'm keen to hear your thoughts on how do we keep the spotlight on the political agenda, in particular on the issue of food systems transformation, given that when we started this conversation, we said there are multiple crises. There's the recovery from the pandemic, there is the geopolitical tension, and yet we're saying we want to make sure that food systems transformation remains top of the agenda. How do we do that realistically? What are your words of advice?
That as Africans, we have to stand united on issues that affect our continent. And together we can do so much together. And I think on COP17, the messages are very clear. For us as Africans, I think we need to push our friends from the north really to honor their commitments. I think this is key. I think it is also important that transparency on various ways of funding green technologies, whether it's the carbon trade, it must be laid out there on the table. Let me give an example. I'm told that the carbon sinks do not include only forests. Even huge reserves like our own mighty Serengeti game park is a very good carbon sink. But the way in which some of these prominent companies trading carbon come to us, they're actually giving us peanuts, not telling us exactly how much resources are being held there. So it's important as Africans, one, to be able to share the experiences, but push also for transparency in terms of the green technologies, how they will be funded. Let me also, I think, reinforce the fact that really the transition from fossil fuels for Africa cannot happen overnight. Yeah. We cannot just dismiss the fossil fuels that we have just because others in the north are way ahead. I think Africa should be assisted to transit gradually to the green technologies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. How do we ensure that we don't lose focus on our own conflicts, but also how do we leverage our regional economic communities for better collaboration, and how do we get more deliberate about using our forums to keep the conversation going? Ladies and gentlemen, if I can kindly ask you to please give the presidential panel a resounding round of applause.